Morning, everybody. We'll declare the meeting open and welcome you all here. First of all, we have to make a declaration re-live streaming. So I remind all present that the open session of this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and that the recording will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website following the meeting. I also remind all present that the local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and the public for comments made during the meeting that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. Apologies, we have one just for lateness, Te Taru White, who's stuck in traffic. So Te Taru will be here probably in about 10 minutes, so we'll just note that. I also want to encourage all elected members to participate in the discussion, whether they're on this particular committee or not. Could I just have a move in a second for that lateness? Thank you. Councillor Winters, and I'll second that. All in favour say aye. Against, carried. Public forum. No one has requested to participate in the public forum. Items not on the agenda. There are none. Order of business. We propose to stick to the current order of business. Are there any declarations of interest by members on any of the items?
Yes, Stuart, if I could just note, there's a matter that comes up, and I think I can be open about it. It's about the one of the emerging risks around gold clams or the various things. I'm the chair of the MPI Risk Committee. I don't think there's going to be any matter that comes up, but I'll leave that to you and the members if in case there's a matter later on that does that way. But just note, please, I'm the chair of the MPI Risk Committee.
Thank you, Bruce. That'll be noted. Any other declarations of interest? Public excluded a business to be transferred into the open. There is none. So we're now on to the confirmation of the minutes that are there on page 8 onwards. Are there any questions, queries or corrections with regard to those minutes? If not, we have a recommendation. Could someone move that they are confirmed? Thank you, Bruce. A second by Andrew. I'll put that all in favour by aye. Against, carried. The next item is the chairperson's report that's been put together by the team, and I'll ask Mr. Taylor to work through that.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. The Chair's report is a report that gives you an overview of the programme for this committee that you have undertaken so far in this triennium, and also a forward plan for the coming calendar year. I'll also be adding to that work programme as we go through the cycle of meetings, including the 2024, particularly relating to the adoption of the long-term plan. So it's relatively brief at the moment because it only has our forward 2 meetings, but for the next meeting I'll put the comprehensive picture for the coming year for 2024 as well. So yeah, so we have our current work programme as well as a future work programme for this year for the committee, and this intended to be highlighted for members to identify any other items for the work programme to be added to it if they consider that's required. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Matt. Something extraordinary pops up, we may have to make an adjustment to that. But if there is no questions or queries, I'll move the receipt of it. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Kevin. Is there any discussion? I'll put that. All in favour say aye. Against, carried. Moving on to the next item, this is the external audit engagement letter and audit plan. And so I'd like to welcome both Noli Norde and, it's Kamara, and Leon Patrese, who's well known to us. Welcome, Leon.
Good morning, members of the committee and chair. This particular report just outlines 2 key documents prepared by Audit New Zealand, Council's appointed audit service provider. The first document's the audit engagement letter, which essentially sets out council's and the appointed auditor's responsibilities in regards to this engagement for the next 3 financial years, including this one. And the second document is the audit plan, which sets out the more detailed audit logistic matters around timing, audit issues, risks, and the audit process that are specific to the audit of council for this financial year. So that's in essence an overview of the content. Any questions on those documents? Mr. Sir would be available to answer those.
Leon, do you want to make some introductory remarks and speak to both the documents, the letter and the plan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to speak about or talk to the papers, but I noticed Kumaran's comments just now, as well as what is in your pack. It's all summarized. So everything I was going to say is already in your pack. So I'd rather not waste your time. Rather take questions if that's okay.
Thank you. Can I ask one of the obvious ones? You have yet to, I think, identify the fees moving forward. Where are we at with that? As you know, it's quite a controversial issue at the moment in the local government world. And when would we expect a schedule proposed from you?
Yeah, thank you. That is one I expected, because it is going through, I think, a much better process this year than it did in the past. So what our ELT as well as OAG is doing this year is to get all city council fees, all regional council fees, and all district council proposed fees, and compare that so that they do a proper moderation across all these sectors. So unfortunately, the only ones that's been confirmed are the city council fees. I expect the regional council fees, which of course impacts on you shortly, to be able to bring to you. So we're looking at quite a range of increases. I've seen anything from about 30% to 80%, depending on the starting point of how reasonable the hours are, because this is about hours, so that we can do our resourcing based on actual hours or expected hours. Now the fees just follow on from that. That doesn't help you, because you are more interested in what it costs you than how many staff I need to complete the audit. But that is where I'm looking at. For your council, I probably expect an increase of about 30%, but I'll bring that to a next meeting.
And I'm sure you're having this conversation with the team, what can we do to be most effective and efficient to reduce the actual required hours? Because I'm assuming there's a trade-off there. The more questions and work you have to do that we could actually address at the beginning of the process may reduce, hopefully, some of those extra costs.
Mr. Chair, the bad news is that your management and staff are already doing a stellar job. There's not much more they can do. They are proactive. They're coming in with technical issues early in the process. So we'll work with Kumaran and Nolene to see if there are any areas that we can reduce the hours and therefore the fees. But I'm not aware of any at this stage.
Bruce.
Probably just a couple of questions, Leon. Are you able to tell us what your hours were for last year out of the budget? I take it that's not sensitive. I appreciate this is still a fee letter, but I want to then follow up with a question to Kumaran about our hours. So are you able to give me any idea?
Mr. Robertson, if you give me a quick sec, I can actually tell you that.
The system. Look, while you're doing that, Leon, Kumaran, my real question at this stage is, plans being set, we've got the dates in here. They're the right dates, obviously, from an adoption perspective. The critical thing, I think, for the committee at this point is to have a level of assurance that we, as the provider of the draft information and all the final information, have got our plans in place, our resourcing in place. In other words, all the good stuff that Leon said, we do actually have in place for this year. And at this point, you see no problems in us delivering on our part of the bargain, which gets me back to keep his hours down.
Just Through the chair, just to comment on that. Yes, so that's audit plans are in place. We're having regular catch-ups with audits to look at our preparation and audit preparation and in anticipation of audit visits. Also noting the fact that the scope of the audit this year is a bit broader than prior years, with the rating function also being looked at. So we've factored that and communicated that to the wider organization to ensure that we are as best prepared as we can be in advance of those audit visits.
Thank you, Chair. Leon, I think there's two aspects to the fee issue, and clearly the Chair and the Council can negotiate or settle on the fee. But from my perspective, the fee, relative to where you're going in terms of the increase, the expectation in terms of delivery has to step up as well. So we've had some discussion about our preparation in terms of delivering to you, but I think, you know, if you take a real commercial approach to this, the expectation in terms of a higher fee, then the expectation from my point of view anyway, is that there's delivery to meet those timelines that you set out. I appreciate in the last few years, there's been some delays, but the issue from Audit New Zealand in terms of resourcing, you can't get the people. Sorry, it's not our problem. Audit New Zealand needs to resource that right up front before you start.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. May I respond to that, Mr. Chair? Yeah, I take your point. And resourcing is definitely not your problem, it's our problem. So we've increased our resources quite significantly, not only by bringing in junior staff, but bringing in lateral hires from across the world. Now, I was also called a lateral hire. So you're a good auditor, you know what you do. I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about our new staff. You know what you're doing, but you don't know New Zealand. You don't know New Zealand public sector. You don't know New Zealand local government sector. It took me a year to understand that. We've got better training processes in place now to train those staff up, to get them up to speed as soon as possible. We've got a South African who started just the other day, and I put him on this, although he's at a very high level, I put him on this audit at a lower level. We're not paying for him, by the way, to train him up to make sure that he's ready for the next audit. So that's what we've been doing. I'm comfortable we'll meet your deadlines this year.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And the other thing I think we need to recognise, Chair, is that I'm not just referring to the parent, I'm referring to the group.
Already had those discussions with KPMG and the port and Quayside, and we're set to meet those deadlines.
Kevin.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just interested in, often when you're doing an audit, you're looking at different things come to your attention. Is there any special things you'll be looking at us for this year? Is there a theme across the country that you're bringing to audit?
I think because of the carrying value of infrastructure assets for all councils, that's something we'll look at, and it's in the audit plan. It's a significant area of audit focus for me. And for your audit, we also, so that will take a lot of time and effort, and external experts involved from council side as well, management already engaged. Then we're also looking at the put option, because there's a bit of risk and estimation around that. Then the implementation of your rates that you brought in-house, it's something else we'll be looking at. We won't do a separate engagement, it'll be part of this year's engagement to understand that we're up to speed with that. Oh, I shouldn't forget management override of controls, which is normal across all audits. Every audit you have to look at that. And then, consolidation, because of the group, it's a mixed group. You've got for profits, the port as well as Quayside coming into a public benefit entity being the council. And are there any changes needed because of the different accounting standards? Those will basically be our focus areas.
Have we found the hours yet?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So for last year, it was about 1,400 hours. I'm not looking to go there with this year's fees. I can't talk too much about this year's fees because I have to get approval from the OAG first. But we've reduced it through what we've experienced last year on the audit. Expect that we have the resourcing we were talking about earlier, better resourcing at the right level for this audit, and we don't expect the same impact that we had with COVID and for this year's audit.
Yeah, just following on from Councillor Winter's question about the scope. Is in your letter you refer to the Auditor General sometimes having special issues? Are there any of those on the horizon?
Oh yes, the Three Waters, but the Three Waters reform shouldn't impact you, but we don't know yet. So that is at all councils. We'll basically keep a watching brief. What is going to happen? How as legislation change? So that'll probably be the most significant. There's one other one, I forgot what it was. Sorry, Councillor.
Leon, I seem to remember on another entity I'm on that in year 2, there may be some specific requirements around climate change reporting. Would you like to update us on that, please? Because that's something quite new.
Yeah, thank you. That was the other one, Councillor. Is definitely climate change. So for listed entities like Quayside, they have, and the port, there are some specific requirements to reporting against climate change and what is going to happen in future. So we've been talking to the port, KPMG and Quayside already, and we've got an internal team of experts because, although I grew up on a farm and I could see things grow and not grow, I am not an expert on climate change. So we've got a team of experts that we will have discussions with those listed entities. Auckland Council is one. They've already reported some climate change. And we'll be working closely with the port. Well, not the port as much because that's more KPMG, but definitely Quayside. And then, of course, that flows through into your annual report in future as well. And what the requirements are going to be, it's still kind of grey. It's not that clear at this stage.
You, Mr. Chair. So just to give councillors some reassurance and confidence, the interim audit has already begun. So as Leon said, he's got auditors here in the building at the moment, sitting up in one of our meeting rooms who are actually undertaking the work now. So we can have confidence that that started on time with the resources that were promised, and we're feeding information into the team and providing answers. So the audit has begun really well for this financial year, hasn't it, Leon?
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so the interim audit has started. Progress has been made, really good progress, not just progress. So I'm quite comfortable with where we're at with the audit at this stage, the interim audit. So, and yeah, we'll work through any findings we do have with management first, and that'll come back to you. But not at this stage, I'm not aware of any significant issues.
Thank you for that. Are there any final questions, queries? If not, thank you, Leon, for working through those issues with us. We have a recommendation that we receive the report, external audit engagement letter and plan. Moved Councillor Winter, second Councillor Von Daudelson. Any other questions, commentary? If not, I'll put that. All in favour, say aye. Against, carried. See you next time, Leon.
Thank you.
So now we're moving on to the internal audit and status update. Quite a comprehensive report here. And as Aaron is going to present it, it's just on page 33. And we've set aside a reasonable time for this. So you just initially, Aaron, just want to introduce it and maybe work our way through it. And then I'm sure there'll be some questions afterwards.
Sure. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Good morning, independent member. It is a relatively brief update on the actual status program itself this quarter. I'll take that report as read. The update shows that the IA program delivery is on track. We've had a couple of the longer standing actions closed off, particularly relating to procurement, which is good to see. And we've included the Waka Kotahi investment audit. It's not part of our internal audit program, but it's taken here to show that here are findings that will relate to our upcoming procurement and contract management reviews. And this will give the council more visibility over this audit due to it being high value and high visibility. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I've had a request from one particular councillor related to the process for follow-up audit actions and the reporting that we've done here. So we've added an extra table, Aaron, haven't we? So could you just, for the benefit of councillors who have maybe not seen those audits when they first come to the committee, just talk a little bit about the process for the summary audit report that you provide, highlighting the actions, and then the process for those follow-up actions?
Sure. Through you, Chair. When we issue the audit report, each of the findings has a particular assigned person and assigned date when it's due. We collate those into a register, and then each quarter we get in touch with each audit action owner and we ask them, how are you going with that audit action? Is there an update? Has it been completed? We then prepare a summary report, and that will show where actions have been closed off or where actions are still open. In this case, we've now included information about whether the action is overdue or not.
And the summary information that you provide there, Aaron, there are dates related to each of those. So the next table with more detail will actually say it was due on the 1st of January and it's not been completed, and it now expected to be completed on the 1st of February, March, April, whatever the date would be. So you have that detail behind each of those actions with internal audit.
Yes, we do.
Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 57, Aaron, the gravel extraction on the top page 59, I think you've got an explanation 58 in terms of fees and charges. So is it just the fees and charges, or is it the actual physical gravel extraction that's an issue?
One moment. Through you, Chair. There's a number of actions relating to that audit. Some of them relate to fees and charges for how much we charge to pull the gravel out of the ground. And I understand that will be updated as part of the long-term plan. The other actions relate to the actual plan itself around how we manage gravel across our various riverbeds, and that's being worked on at the moment.
Just, Mr. Chairman, I think we just need a bit more information about that. Somewhere being brought back to us, because if that's an issue, I'd like to get my head around that a bit more.
Mr. Chairman, so what we can do for the September update is, and I'd suggest for all of the outstanding actions, Aaron, we have a bit more detail. So it's summarised there.
Yeah.
But if members for assurance want a little bit more detail for each of those, it's just the length of the report and summary. But of course, we have all of that information for every action. We can do it on just the outstanding actions and focus on the high and medium priority actions. And that appendix to this report then would give you the information I think that you're seeking.
Sure, that could be done. Just with reference to those fees and charges, the actual finding itself was simply that those fees and charges hadn't been looked at for quite some time. So the resolution is to, one, have a process to do that from time to time, and to actually update it. And that's being done as part of the long-term plan.
Okay.
Yeah, is gravel extraction part of our freshwater consultation? I'm kind of thinking it is. And if so, does that risk feed into this, and how do the two talk to each other? I'm sure it is part of our freshwater consultation. Can anyone talk to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Are you aware, Aaron, from the internal audit?
Very Chair. It wasn't as part of that particular audit. That looked really at gravel management as part of the river management in terms of making sure we don't get unnecessary flooding and that we look after the risk correctly. It didn't come up at that time in that audit, but it could be put as a future topic.
Yeah, because I think it is one of the big issues we've got. You know, we've got water take, gravel take, all of those things that are things that we need to consider. And I'm just not exactly sure where I've read about gravel extraction, but I think it's part of our wider freshwater consultation, and where we land with that, I suppose, impacts the risk.
I was just going to say, Chair, no, I don't think it is. River management, in terms of the management of the river course, is separate from the MPSFM freshwater. But it is an ongoing issue that needs to be managed. Councillor Winters is aware of the tensions, both historical and current, that foresee this issue while it sits on the risk register.
Te Tiriti implications as well as to the ownership of like the whole that whole thing.
Precisely. It's referred to as rights and interests.
Okay, thank you for that. Oh, sorry, Bruce.
No worries. I just wanted to, sorry, if that's finished, I wanted to actually just ask about the Waka Kotahi order, if that's okay. Tommy? Look, I mean, I'm glad that you brought up, Aaron, as you've said, it's a key part of our income, and I suspect, Stuart, as we get closer to our LTP, just as we talked about fees and charges for gravel extraction, maximising our other revenue becomes really important, I suspect. That is certainly the case around the rest of the sector. So I'm interested that we actually are protecting our ability to gain subsidy. I take it there's nothing in their recommendations where some improvement is needed that causes us any particular concern in terms of meeting their recommendations and therefore thereby certifying our ability to claim money.
Mr. Chairman, I can answer that question. Fiona McTavish and I met with the auditor and the senior leadership team of the transport team. The issues over improvements, and auditors can always find improvements, which have been really good and helpful in this particular audit. They related to our, especially our particular circumstances of many variations because of our school service with our contractors, and we have multiple variations that happen when school services change, and sometimes those variations take a long time to get through and agree with the contractor before the process and the paperwork is done. So the auditor suggested a quicker, more speedy process, because the longer it's outstanding, the more you don't have the paperwork to sign off the actual operational matters when the change happens. So one of the particular things relating to procurement was related to how long it takes us to get variation signed. But because of our multiple contracts, the almost constant changes with some of our school services, it was a problematic area because of the volume of them here at Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So the auditor reflected on that. It's unique here, but obviously gave some good suggestions about how we can improve the process so that it's not as long-winded as it is with the number of people that have to sign it off, and finishing off with me signing off the paperwork.
Yeah.
So yes, improvements, but nothing of concern, but just how you can improve your processes, which is what you often get in these internal audits.
And I understand that went to PT, Andrew. Ron.
Yeah, that was also related to that report is the red flags that might have been specific to transport, I guess, but just my question is whether there are more organisationally wide issues around procurement and contract management that as a result you've looked at and seen there's some work we need to do here. Bearing in mind the internal audits for a couple of those areas have been a while now.
Through you, Chair, that's why the procurement audit is on the program for next year, and contract management will be the year following. That is part of the next presentation around the internal audit work program. But yep, these findings will be included in the scoping for those reviews.
Councillor Winters.
Just in Caroline's report, Mr. Chairman, page 63, fifth paragraph down, I'm assuming that should be April 2023.
Spotted, Councillor Winters.
I do read this stuff, Matt.
No other further questions or queries. We have a recommendation with regard to the internal audit status update that it's received. Thank you, Bruce. Second, Councillor Scott. I'll put that on the favour, so aye, against carried. Now on to the more substantive one, which is the proposed program moving forward. Aaron again to introduce us and speak to it if necessary.
Thank you, Chair. The internal audit work program that lays out the assurance program we intend to deliver in the next financial year, and then the 2 following years, what would most likely be looked at, essentially what's on our assurance radar. The program itself we put together in consultation with the leadership team, with some of the key managers around council. We consider the key risk register and we incorporate feedback from the Risk and Assurance Committee throughout the year. So basically what's come up during meetings, we consider that. We also think about what's topical around Greater New Zealand. The program aims to have a balance of framework reviews, operational reviews and strategic risk. At this stage, the program has been reviewed and endorsed by the leadership team, and the program is now brought to yourselves for review and approval. Are there any questions, comments, feedback?
Aaron?
Mr. Chair, could I just add a couple of comments on the review for leadership team? Maybe unusually at organisations, what happens when Aaron brings the draft report to leadership team is normally members of the leadership team add things to the programme. I've worked places elsewhere where people try to get things off of the internal audit programme. That's certainly not the case here. And the challenge is always to squeeze the audit universe into a programme that is deliverable by the team with the external resources and capacity that we add in as well. So we've had a good look at this individually as leadership team members, as well as a collective, to try to balance the priorities and the capacity that we have within the team. And then we arrive at this programme that we recommend then is approved here. So there is an understanding that there's always more work that could be done, but this is probably within the capacity that we have within the internal audit team.
So colleagues, is there anything missing you think is relative to this program? Bear in mind it can be a little adaptable over the next, this is over a period of time, isn't it?
Yes, Chair, it's the next 3 years. It's kind of what we do next year and what we most likely will do the next couple of years after
You're
that.
struggling to achieve 23 of them in 1 year. Andrew.
Mr. Chair, and I don't know if this would come up in the when we look at the risk profile in the public excluded or not, but I want to raise the issue of the risk with our investment with Keystone Holdings, and I think it's something that needs considering somewhere in our risk register. Now, whether we discuss it here or in the public excluded is your call.
So, Mr. Chairman, it sounds like a risk register item for the discussion under that item rather than internal audit later on, if that's okay.
Just flagging it.
Bruce.
A couple of questions, Aaron, please. Thank you, Stuart. I am interested in your point about it's adaptable, and I was interested in just looking at the days you have to devote to that, recognising the numbers you put out. I'm always interested, do we have for you any free time? Now, by that I mean ability for it to be targeted to work that we don't know yet, but we need to come up during the course of the year? Or is it a case of you don't have that free float? If something else comes up, something's got to drop off this program.
Very Chair. Yeah, the resourcing for the team, me, is essentially there's a program of formal work that we outline. We also build in some time for me to do responsive reviews. For example, if management come to me with an issue, hey, we would like to know about this. Yep, we can take care of that within the program.
That's
and also there's external funding to support that if we need to.
That's great. Actually, what in relationship to your question, Stuart, is anything not only that you'd expect? Matt, I wonder, was there anything that you didn't put on at a management level that you might have thought of or indeed excluded?
Yeah, that's a good point. And what we did through the conversation at Leach Team, look at reviews that weren't necessarily internal audit reviews, but they would be management reviews that would be undertaken by that team within that general manager's sphere of influence or control. So there were a number of other items that needed reviewing, but they weren't necessarily internal audit that suited the skills of the internal audit team. So the other items would sit within the team. So there was nothing that was internal audit that's not on this programme.
If I could just, Stuart, ask this one more final question, which is, I I like the program, by the way. So, strong support from me for the work that you're actually doing. The bit that interests me is our responsibility, dare I say, around fraud and corruption. And it's not that I'm saying that we need to do anything particular on fraud and corruption, but some of the traditional internal audit programs can be around more systems oriented, around payroll checks, around some of those core systems. Now, we obviously have external audit, but they only do it from a particular perspective, not from an internal audit perspective. I'm not certain that I see that having been considered, or am I picking up the report wrong?
Through you, Chair. It's an interesting one. As an auditor, we always look at the possibility of fraud. It's kind of part of what we do. We don't necessarily go looking for it and say, hey, you're doing fraud, but we look for it. The program does try and strike a balance between looking at core financial processes, which is bread and butter audit, but also looking at operational items where arguably some of the higher risks for council can present. We did do a fraud risk review a couple of years ago, and that may become cyclical. We also have a number of finance processes within the program, and particularly within the finance area. If any audit looks at the finance area, fraud will always be in the back of our mind. We won't necessarily put in the scope, hey, we're going to look at fraud, because one, that might freak out the audience, and two, we're not suggesting there is. It's just part of the methodology. We do look for it. If we saw something, it would be raised appropriately.
I mean, that's great. I mean, that's the answer I expect. I was looking more at, are we doing sufficient systems work, financial systems work generally, which then enables you to do exactly what you've just said. I agree, have regard to the risk of fraud and corruption without it being a particular target. I appreciate there can be a separate review. I'm not arguing for that. I'm arguing, are we doing enough of the financial systems to have confidence that our controls are effective, and therefore we can opine there's an absence of fraud and corruption?
Through you, Chair. Yeah, I understand the point. You'll have noticed, for example, that budgeting and forecasting is on the radar. As part of that, we'll look at the system that actually makes that happen. When I looked at payroll, when I said it was pretty good, it was part of why I was looking at the system. Particularly for those cyclical reviews, I do tend to focus on what's changed more than redo everything. The current rates review, which is in progress, that is looking at the new systems put in place, plus how our existing system, Finance One, Tech One, is interacting with it. So again, if anything touches finance, I'll look at the system. If there's a operational review that relies on a key system, whether it be the GIS program, whether that be a seller, I will again look at that.
Look, I'm happy with that. As I said, I like the nature of the program, and the only thing I'd say is perhaps to have a sense that you have that theme or that awareness is useful, perhaps inside the internal audit plan. I absolutely take your point about actually the optics are important. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, the external partner project management being high risk, is that new, and is that because of the situation we're sort of facing with hiked up prices, stretched out timeframes because of lack of resource in terms of, you contract someone to do this, they can't get the people, the prices have gone up, inflation. Is that what is making that a high priority, or is that always seen as high?
Through you, Chair. The overall target of the review is to make sure we're doing the right things internally to make sure we can facilitate these programs. So sometimes these contracts are delivered by different parts of council. So there might be an engineering aspect, there might be an IT aspect, however that works. It's making sure that we're joined up internally so that we know we've said we'll deliver. Are we actually able to deliver? Do we have the resources, all the supporting things behind those, particularly for the externally funded projects, because the risk with those is that if we aren't seen to meet those, then that doesn't look ideal and may actually have a contractual implication. So again, that's why it's viewed as a higher risk and why it's put on for next year.
Yeah, so it's kind of, those things still might happen externally, but what are we able to mitigate internally to make it as smooth as possible so we don't get the blowout on time or money if possible? sort of, yeah. And I just have one more question, and that's around the freshwater management being high risk. So is the risk there that we may not achieve the freshwater outcomes, or why does that put it into that high risk category?
Through Chair, basically because it's pretty high visibility and quite important.
Yeah.
I know it's a flippant answer, but it is one of those things that if we don't get it right, it puts us straight on the front page of the paper. So
100%.
it's core business for us to make sure that's operating correctly. So in terms of rating the risks, it is a bit of, yeah, it feels high risk, it feels low risk, whatever. There is, in this document, there is a kind of an indicator of how we rank the risks. That's on my page, it's about page 6. It's in, it shows you how we get to A, B, or C, high, medium, or low. But essentially, freshwater would fall in there because it is a business critical function or process, and it is large value and high risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good because it just once again flags up how critical this is and what we're dealing with.
What I should clarify, it's not because I think we're doing something
I
wrong.
know,
Yeah,
I know,
it's more,
but it's across
important
all
level of
levels.
importance
Yeah.
at this stage. As we're scoping out an audit program, I can't tell if we're doing the right or wrong thing until I've actually delivered. Not that I think we are doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Highlighted through the work that we're seeing coming out in the media with regards to Radio New Zealand and reporting, effective fraudulent reporting. Do we take into account this in our organisation? And I'm thinking more of staff usurping governance responsibilities in areas where staff are actually leading or going beyond their operational role into governance roles. And, do we monitor that as a risk, as a risk and assurance issue at all? Recognising what we've just heard in the last couple of days about Radio New Zealand, and they had no internal controls, obviously, on their reporters and work, and it's come to bite them quite hard. Have we got that same sort of risk within our organisation? Do we do anything to monitor it, to report on it? Should we? Is it the responsibility of audit, risk and assurance, or not? Question.
Through you, Chair. Yes, when it's in scope, if it would be a blunt answer. So one of the main points of me fronting up to this committee each quarter is, as well as delivering an improvement outcome for council's risk and controls, is to provide assurance to yourselves that the information being provided is accurate. That's why I'm independent from most teams and provide that view. You'll notice that, for example, the freshwater audit is essentially a commentary, a review of me of the risks and mitigations that you're being advised in the key risk register. It's a lot of information from management saying, hey, we've got all these mitigations, controls in place, and yes, we're doing them. By me coming in and looking at that, making sure that yes, they are actually being done, that's the assurance for yourselves that yes, the information from management is accurate, and that forms part of the governance feedback. The similar review was done over climate change mitigations a couple of years ago, and while it didn't look like there was a lot of findings in that provided assurance that yes, the information from management remains accurate. And so this similar will be performed for freshwater. And if there are other issues, items that are of note, please feed those back.
Also, Aaron, just want to mention the delegations audit and the other point Councillor Van Dallison was making about staff working within their delegations.
Thank you, Aaron. Are there any other questions, queries, or commentary? If not, we have a couple of recommendations. One, we received the report and we approve the work plan as well. Thank you. Move to Taru and second Bruce. Some further discussion? If not, I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, Aaron. A lot of work in there. I look forward to the updates. The next item is with regard to legal compliance and rate setting. Very, very important. If you get it wrong, it's a problem.
So this report essentially covers off what is a standard process as part of the annual planning cycle, and that's to apply a high level of rigor to the rate setting process. And this report provides the committee an oversight of what that process is, and attached to the report is the draft rate setting report that will be taken to council as penciled in for later this month as part of the adoption of the annual plan, and also to advise the committee that the content of that report, along with the rates funding impact statement, has been subject to external legal review, and the feedback from that review has been incorporated into the draft report that is attached to the cover report.
Thank you, Mara. Has there been much change as a result of ourselves going alone and doing our own rates collection? Has there been any significant change in these, or is this basically what we would have done through a TLA?
So we've always gone through an external legal process to make sure our rates resolution is compliant. The major change with our own collection is the application of penalties on arrears. We have several clauses relating to penalties on arrears for the prospective financial year since we've started collecting and previous to our collection. So that's the major implication of our own collection, is those previous arrears in that transition period as those are collected.
Mr. Chair, just to add to that, there are a number of implications on our resolution when we had to wait until the TAs had set their resolution. So penalty dates, penalties, as Mark discussed, all of those items had to be done based on the resolutions of those other councils. We don't have to wait for that anymore. And there is information we have to, we're required to use from the TAs, but we're not waiting for their resolutions to then set our resolution. So this resolution, when it's checked, as long as we've done the right thing and have the right information, then it will be compliant.
Chair, could you just talk us through the current issue you're dealing with regarding the valuation timing and the application of rates, especially in the Western Bay, relative to what we've done or doing in terms of our annual apportionment? What are the risks around that in terms of a substantial change, probably on appeal? You know what I'm talking about anyway. It's the valuation methodology relative to when you've got to strike the rates.
So the only item that we are waiting on in regards to Western Bay's process is the clearance from the Valuer General on the valuation data for that particular area, that district. Once that data has been signed off, we then apply through council's appointed valuer an equalization process because it's been revalued, and then that essentially forms the basis upon which we set the rates for this year. So the timing of when that data is available will determine whether council can adopt the annual plan in time on the 29th of June. At this stage, signals are that that is on track. Correct. So regional council is not dependent on the district council to set their rates. All the regional council is dependent on is the Valuer General's clearance on the property values that underpin the rates for that district.
And that process concludes at the end of an appeal period, is that right?
No, so once the Valuer General has given clearance on the valuation data, that allows council to progress on setting the rates for the annual plan. And that's all we need. The objection process follows afterwards. the data is essentially what's critical for ensuring that we can progress with the annual plan rate setting process.
Yeah, just to follow up, it's certified data, so the Value General certifies the data as correct, but there could potentially be pending appeals that just have to work through the process during the financial year. We would have been in a position a couple of years ago before we collected our rates ourselves of not being able to set rates until one of the TAs had set theirs. That could have happened, but having taken it in-house, we now have that direct control ourselves, but we do have valuation data from the TA, so we're still dependent on that. Material we wouldn't know yet. Would we what the appeals may be for Western Bay? Is there any indication of the volume of appeals that there might be? Don't think we'll know that, will we, Cameron, yet?
We haven't got an appreciation of the dynamics of that just yet. Once that data is made available, that will come evident through the equalisation process that QV runs for council, and we'll be able to share that with elected members thereafter. But at this stage, there's no insight on what that dynamic change might be for the district.
I think, Chair, if I'm right, just so we understand it, I think the issue that's sitting here is that the valuations were done at the peak of the retail property cycle relative to where they are now, which is probably a 20% decline. So everybody who gets their valuation based on what was perceived to be the peak is now sitting saying, well, that's not relevant anymore. Where do we actually sit? And I think that is the appeal issue that sits in front of Western Bay in the Valuer General, right?
Yes, and it's fair to say with the valuations that have gone on, anecdotally, we've heard from the regional CFOs is that there's been some material changes to their valuations where those valuations have happened, and members of the public may well be concerned because of that time lag of the date of the valuation compared with the current date, but it is the date of the valuation where that value is taken. So that difference won't be a reason for a legitimate appeal because it is that date, as you said, Mr. Chairman, when it was the peak.
There's a lot of public confusion around that too. They perceive their rates will go down. It doesn't quite work like that. They could go down, but it's relative to something else going up, of course. So just when you poke a balloon, you know, might go on one side, but it pops out the other. They still have to collect X amount. Councillor Winters.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if we can have a resolution 26 on page 111 as well, and it's to do with targeted rates on contiguous landmark. And you said last time we were talking to you that if you've got a contiguous property, you only pay one PT rate, you only pay one uniform annual general charge, one regional safety emergency rate, one civil defence emergency management rate, and there was one other, and I can't remember what it is. Just so that people, when they get their rates bill on contiguous properties, they can check that we haven't doubled up.
Thank you for the feedback. I'll just investigate that through as to whether that needs a separate legal resolution on it or whether it's covered through the rating categories of land under the Local Government Rating Act and the Rates for Emissions policies. But I'll clarify the situation with that one before we adopt for council.
So whether it's a resolution issue or a communication issue?
But I think it's a comms, Mr. Chairman, because we have that nice pānui that when we send out the rates, and I'm just wondering if we can have a sentence or a paragraph on that as well. Like
avoid that confusion.
With the Port of Tauranga
and how much
revenue,
dividend? Yeah.
You know, just a separate box to say you should only be paying one da 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 da, and there's a fifth one too, Mark, and I can't remember what it is on contiguous properties.
Will only be paying one. Yes.
There you go.
Not should. Yeah.
I think, Chair, the answer to that question is you've got to apply for it.
On contiguous properties?
Because
no.
how would they know?
If it's not been correctly recorded in the rating information database, you can apply for a correction to it, but it should be picked up by the TA as how they categorise the property. But you're right, if it isn't done correctly, you have to apply to correct it.
It's not based just on ownership. You could have a leasehold property next door to which you pay the rates on, that in terms of ownership. as two separate people. So generally, smart money on it in terms of communication is to say, if you have two contiguous properties that you operate as the one entity, you need to apply for it,
Yeah,
which is setting the data record straight.
but they need that information to know that they can apply for it somehow.
Yes.
You know.
Yep. And we've been working where there is inconsistency among the TAs where it's
Yeah,
recognised
and
by
that
the
came
rating
through.
staff here.
That came
And there
through.
have been a number of contiguous properties that have been recognised by our staff that has then been reported to the TAs because it's our rates and their rates as well. So it benefits the customer on both sides.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Given that this is a hugely important issue, seems to be some confusions amongst TLAs and even conversations around this table. There must be massive confusion out there at the moment that I'm sort of thinking is coming through on this particular issue. Is there any audit and risk issues around the process or levels of consultation or communication at all?
And value, particularly you're talking about?
Yes.
So from our perspective, all of the resolutions and process have been checked as legal and compliant, all based on council decisions in accordance with the Local Government Act. So there is no substantive audit and risk issue from our perspective. Of course, it's always a sensitive matter for the public when they get a rates bill.
Okay, look, thank you for that. So we'll just check on one item. And other than that, we can receive the report, the rate setting report. I'm happy to move. Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Winters. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put that. All in favour say aye. Against, carried. No, we'll just finish off the public. Then we'll be right. So the last item in open is the asset register and data improvements report. And Kamara, were you going to speak to that in the first instance?
So the purpose of this report is to bring to the committee's attention as part of council's ongoing asset data improvement program. That's been discovered that unrecorded assets to the value of 4.8 million has been identified and signaled to audit as part of the annual audit process. And that's just to proactively manage any technical matters that come through the audit process and raise it with audit as early as we possibly can. And this is not atypical in the sector as part of asset data improvement where unrecorded assets are discovered on a regular basis. And that's just the nature of council's assets and the vastness of their asset base. And essentially this because of the quantum of this value, audits in a preliminary view on the matter is that it's likely to be disclosed or will likely need to be disclosed as a prior period error and will have ongoing reporting implications for future annual reports if the status of that remains the same. So this is more just to bring to the committee's attention the initial stages of this technical matter, and the item is actually sitting with the technical team at Audit New Zealand and will be subject to confirmation as part of that review. So we will be able to finalize that before the annual report is fully drafted and have a final position on that disclosure.
Kamara, maybe you just want to comment on the materiality of that value. Members of the committee just raised that point with us, bearing in mind external audits materiality numbers that they had in their audit plan and the value of 4.8 million in terms of materiality compared with the value of the assets.
So one of the things that audit is, actually I was advised this morning by the audit director, is that they are testing their materiality level of this quantum with their technical team in relation to the total value of council's asset base. And that will be subject to that technical review and feedback to us. So that position's yet to be determined by audit, but is very much an item that's under consideration.
Thank you, Kamara. So what's been put in place from a IT program perspective or data input perspective to reduce the risk of this moving forward?
Chair, we have Stacey Brooks that's in attendance at the meeting. Perhaps she could answer the question in terms of the improvement program.
Hello,
Good morning.
Stacey. Are you there? Morning, Stacey.
Good morning. In response to that question, we've got a number of processes that we're trying to put in place to avoid this errors happening in the future. So one of those is the capitalisation process, and another one is the capital works process, so that we ensure that capital works that are undertaken in the future are captured correctly, so that they're captured in the asset register.
Yeah, so the point that Stacey's making there is that so when you do a new capital asset, you create a new capital asset through the capital works, that definitely appears on your register at the time that the work is created. So that process, which seems obviously very logical and clear, sometimes doesn't capture all of the historical assets. So capturing it at the time you do it, at the value that you do it for, is obviously critical to that.
And the class I understand was rivers and drainage. Is that correct?
Yes.
Any other questions or queries? Bruce?
Sorry, just piqued my interest. What is the technical issue? We know it's technical. What decision has to be made that requires a technical review?
So there's in relation to the age of the assets that make up the 4.8 million, they are quite old assets. And one of the viewpoints we've provided audit is whether that could be recognized as part of retained earnings and just do it as a reserve transfer as opposed to a prior period error. So because of the age profile of those assets, that is the element that technical are working on as to whether that can either be done as a reserves movement away from expense into reserves and then reflected in the asset base, or needed to be disclosed as a prior period error.
Right, no, thank you. I didn't realise, yes, we've got an alternate view on the accounting as in contrast to the auditor. I get you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay.
I don't know if this question is relevant, but I see that it's sort of that being discovered is $10,000 more in premium, insurance premium. So is there assessment done on whether those things actually need insuring other than third party? Because if they're old depreciating assets, do we always insure every single thing we have?
So if that is an asset that we are looking to replace, so it's a critical asset, that would fall under our insurance program for coverage.
Yeah, and would that insurance program not have picked up that these things are uninsured from that way round? Would that not flag this up? And how come not? If you see what I mean, unidentified assets.
So there's probably there's a singular process that looks at asset values both for valuation purposes, for establishing what the value of council's asset base is. That same process is also used to feed into asset data for insurance purposes. So it's that singular process that would normally be the one that would pick up these types of unrecorded assets. And also for the committee to be mindful of in the future is that the progress or the process of data improvement is always likely or susceptible to pick up aged assets that may not have been recorded through past processes, and that's just the nature of local government. So there may be assets being picked up that are quite dated, that are sitting in the ground, that will be picked up as part of the asset improvement process, and that's just a natural consequence of one of those items. The big focus on the asset improvement element is that assets that are going into the ground that we know of at this point in time, that those are capitalized and recorded appropriately and timely.
I think, Chair, Councillor McMillan, this issue regarding aged assets and insurance. So if you've got a real old asset, whether it's been recorded or not, if there's a failure of that asset, the insurers only will pay out essentially the depreciated or the aged value of that asset. So you might have a flood pump that costs $100,000 and it's been there for 35 years. you're probably only going to get, I don't know, $5,000 for it. So what insurers sometimes do is they run a generalisation. So you might assure a suite of assets on the basis that one will fail, as opposed to insuring each and every item.
Further questions? If not, we have a recommendation that we receive the report on asset register and data improvements. To the mover, thank you, Te Taru. Second, Councillor Scott. I'll put that. All in favour, say aye. Against, carried. So, councillors, that concludes the end of the open session. We will break for morning tea, but before we do that, can we just move that we move into public excluded, so we don't keep the audience on. Thank you, Councillor Van Dalen.